Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over how to build a deck with a budget mana base. Now this video is going to be split over into two parts, just so it's not super long and unwieldy and all that kind of stuff. This video, the first section will focus on the deck and ways you can build one to get the most out of a budget mana base. The second video will focus on the lands that go in it. Both videos will be broken down into several different sections. Every section we cover won't apply to every deck, but the more of them you can use and follow, then the better your deck will play. This video will aim to give you tips and advice for all mana bases and all colours of decks. Before we start, I do want to go over what a fully tuned mana base gives you, something that we're trying to replicate. It basically gives you consistency. It allows you to play your spells when you want to. It means you're hitting all your colours of mana on the turns that you need them to cast your spells. So like on turn 2 you can play a 2-drop, on turn 3 you can play a 3-drop, that kind of thing. Decks with budget mana bases and the mana bases themselves, if they're not built correctly, can leave you a turn or two behind your opponents, missing colours, and basically meaning that you're not able to play Magic and not having a lot of fun. So that's what we're trying to avoid, and with that, let's crack on. As mentioned, the sections in this video aren't actually about the lands themselves, more about the things to consider to allow the mana base you have to do its thing at the most optimal level. One of the best ways we can improve the consistency of the deck is by not being greedy with the mana requirements that we're asking for it to make. By this, I mean limiting the amount of coloured pips in your deck. The less hungry your deck is for coloured mana, the easier it will be to cast your spells on time. So with that, if you're having trouble with the deck and you're not being able to curve out as you want, consider cutting out some of the cards with multiple pips in their casting costs and see how that works. This is more important with the more colours that your deck has. For example, a monocoloured deck will have a far easier time of casting a spell with a lot of coloured pips in its requirement than a 3 or 4 coloured deck. When building a deck, it's always a good idea to count out the number of pips in the casting cost of your spells and make a note of them. The more you have, and the wider variety of different colours there are, then the more greedy or not your deck is. This will also be very important later on when we work out how many of each land types we need to play. I'm using one of my Sultai decks here as an example, and we'll be using it as we go through the videos. Another key aspect of this is picking on the curve where your spells with multiple coloured pips go. Especially in a deck with more colours, having your spells with multiple pips on the higher drop spells means you're more likely to be able to cast them when it's meant to be cast. For example, in a multicoloured deck, you have less chance of casting a spell with 2 pips in its colour identity at the earliest point you can. Compare that to a 6-drop with 2 coloured pips, and you're much more likely to be able to cast it at its earliest possible point. The reason is simply that the later in the game it is, the more of the deck you've seen and the more chance you've had of getting an additional producer of that colour. Everything I've said here doesn't mean that you can't jam Necropotence into a 5-colour deck. I'm not your dad, you do you. What it means is that in a 3 to 5 colour mana base, you're not really going to be able to casting it on turn 3 as you could in a mono black deck. Our next section is something else to consider when building the deck, and that's picking a base colour. What I mean by this is that the largest portion of the colour requirements of a deck, so like the most amount of pips, is all made up in one colour. So if you're doing this, when you count up the number of coloured pips in your deck, it means that one colour makes up the majority of a deck. In a 2-colour deck, this is about 2/3 or so of the deck. In a 3+ colour deck, then it's over half of the deck. What this does is bring down the quantity of colours that the deck needs, and means that you're more likely to have at least something to do as one of your colours is heavily supported. This also means you can save money on dual lands, as if you're playing one primary colour, you can focus on dual lands that tap for that colour, and then fill in the gaps around it. So for example, in an Esper deck with a base colour of black, you focus on dual lands that tap for black and white and black and blue, because black is the primary colour of the deck, and black is the primary colour that you want to be hitting. Okay, so getting this one out of the way, and what I meant earlier when I said some categories won't apply to all decks, one of the easiest ways to run a budget mana base is to have your deck be based in green. Green gives you access to ramp spells like Rampant Growth and Cultivate, which put you ahead on mana, then also tutor up your other colours of mana for fixing. You then also have creatures like Sakura Tribelder and Paradise Druid, which also either tutor up lands or tap for different colours of mana themselves. Even better than those, green has access to spells like 3 Visits and Farseek, which can tutor up non-basic lands with subtypes on them, so it lets you tutor up any budget dual lands that you have. This is far more important when you're trying to run a deck that's 4 or 5 colours, and is really the main way you can build a deck like these on the cheap. Mana Rocks and Mana Dorks have a key part to play when it comes to your mana base. They can ramp you ahead, but more importantly when working on a budget is that they can fix your mana as well. The more colours your deck has will mean you want to run less rocks that tap for colourless mana. This is where things like Signets especially have a great place. I know things like Soul Ring and Mana Vault are very powerful cards, however they won't help you cast cards with multiple pips in their mana costs. I've broken it down on screen what I would personally run when building a deck, so take this as a base and then tweak it to suit your deck's needs. Decks with Rampant Growth style effects won't need to stick to this anywhere near as much. This is mainly for decks where the main source of ramp and fixing is coming from artifacts and creatures. Another way you can make your mana base more consistent is by taking card slots from the deck and dedicating them to effects that give you additional ways of fixing your mana. These aren't to be included in your ramp package, as these don't replace ramp, they are there purely for fixing. The downside of this is obviously you're taking out space for other cool cards and putting in cards to actually make your deck work. So you lose out on some card choice, but you get the consistency to make the rest of your spells work. But that is one of the trade-offs of having a budget mana base. Cards with basic land cycling are very good at this. The best is probably the cycle of cards from Commander 2016, as the land cycling really helps you early game and fix your mana, and the effects the cards have themselves are all generally decent enough to play, with some of them actually being really, really good. If you're in a deck with black, then there's Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, which automatically fixes all your lands for black. For 5-colour decks, there is Dryad of the Elysian Grove and Prismatic Omen. While I will admit these aren't super budget cards, they're a hell of a lot cheaper than a 5-colour mana base, so something to consider if you're going that route. Then there's also Chromatic Lantern, which turns all our lands into command towers. This is the only one of these that I would count towards my ramp, as it does also tap for mana. If you're in a 1 or 2 colour deck, these cards aren't super necessary, but if you're in a 3+ colour deck, especially if you're building on a budget, then I would highly consider running these. Okay, thank you very much for watching, everyone. That was the end of part 1. Part 2 will be coming up shortly in a couple of days or so. If you're watching this in the far-flung future of a week, then the video should just appear after this. So until then, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.